Welcome to the Cabral Concept, where board-certified Doctor of Naturopathy, Dr. Stephen Cabral, shares with you exactly how you can reverse aging, take back your health, and live a life full of energy and passion, with new 20-minute episodes every single day to keep you healthy and engaged. Now, here's your host, Dr. Stephen Cabral.
All right, everybody, we are back with a brand new Cabral Concept. This episode 2812. Excited to do this show for you. And that is because we're combining for the very first time what people know about intermittent fasting also with caloric restriction. Now, we know caloric restriction as well as intermittent fasting have their own benefits. But what if they were to be combined? Well, this study actually looks at that in a very novel approach and as to what they are to say the very first time it's ever been done. And they're looking at it in terms of how does it help someone balance their blood sugar. Because if they better balance their blood sugar, it can help with mood, it can help with energy, it can help with weight loss, it can help with cardiovascular issues, Alzheimer's, type 2 diabetes, etc. So the interesting thing is I did a show only 2 weeks ago. It was episode 2791. This research has already come out since then. But on episode 2791, I went over what's better, intermittent fasting or calorie counting. And I did that for overall weight loss. So I'll link up that show today. If you missed it, head on over to stephencabral.com/2812. Now, this show is going to be dedicated, though, to this novel approach that actually did work. That's why I'm bringing it to you. It really worked in terms of helping people better balance blood sugar. So if you're someone that might be dealing with type 2 diabetes or you're dealing with higher elevated glucose levels, it's at least something worth looking into. I can't provide you with any medical advice, medical treatment plans, etc., but I did want to bring the study to you. And of course, I'll link up that study in the show notes here today. So here's what they said. This is the abstract. So abstract is basically, they take a summary of a medical-based study or research study. And so I'll help you make sense of it, but I want to give you what it is. So we developed a novel intermittent fasting plus early time-restricted eating approach. The adults were average age 48 to 68. I think a mean of about 58, at an increased risk for developing type 2 diabetes. And they were randomized into one of three groups. There was the first group, which was the intermittent fasting plus the time-restricted eating. Okay, so these individuals were allowed to eat between the hours of 8 a.m. and 12 noon. And during those days, they could only eat 30% of their total calories. So if they typically would eat 2,000 calories per day, then they could eat 600 calories on those days between 8 and 12. And then that 4-hour window of that, let's say 600 calories, was to be followed up by a 20-hour fasting period on non-consecutive days per week, and then add libitum eating on the other days. So what that means is this. There was one group of people and they could only eat, let's say on Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, between 8 a.m. and 12 noon. And during that 8 a.m. to 12 noon, they could have really whatever food they wanted during that time, as long as it didn't go above 30% of what they would typically eat in a day. So let's say 600 calories. So 8 and 12, they could have 2 meals, 300 calories each. They're good to go. Let's say it was 8 a.m. and then 11 a.m. And that would be it. That would be it for the day. They had 2 meals. Okay. Then after that, they would fast all the way through that next day for 20 hours, right? So when you look at that, what's 20 hours? From 12 o'clock, you just go 20 hours forward. So it's 12, and then you have, 8 hours more till 8 o'clock or so the next day. And then you'd be able to eat whatever it is that you wanted on that day. Let's say it's Tuesday. Now, on Wednesday, you would do it again. On Wednesday, 8 to 12, you could eat. Then you wouldn't eat again until the next morning, that 20 hours, and then you would be able to eat whatever you wanted on Thursday, and then on Friday, you'd go back to this 8 to 12 fast. So that was one group. Okay. The second group was caloric restriction. So they could eat 70% of what they would typically eat on a daily basis. And this would be without a time prescription, and they could basically do this each day of the week. So what would that look like? 70% of 2,000 calories would be 1,400 calories. Okay, so they could eat 1,400 calories per day. That was it out of the typical 2,000. So that was the caloric restriction. And the last one was standard care. So that basically they were given a weight loss booklet that was just, your typical, have your, chocolate milk at breakfast with your, special case cereal or like that, the typical weight loss recommendations, which are not healthy, not ideal, but they're typically give you a calorie-based diet. That's what they look to do. All right, so now let's look at that. This open label parallel group 3-arm randomized control trial provided nutritional support to participants in the time restricted eating as well as the caloric restriction for 6 months with an additional 12-month follow-up. The primary outcome was changed in a glucose area under the curve in response to a mixed meal tolerance test at month 6 in the time restricted eating and the caloric restricted eating. Glucose tolerance was improved to a greater extent in the time restricted eating compared to the restricted caloric restriction. It looked like it was a drop in about 10 points in glucose versus about 3.5 points for caloric restriction, and basically nothing for the weight loss based booklet, small amounts. And the confidence was 95%, which is pretty strong for a study. And so here's the interesting thing. The time restricted eating, the Monday, Wednesday, Friday, we're going to call it, for 8 to 12, have your 2 meals there, 600 calories only, beat the caloric restriction of eating less calories per day every day. And then both of those, of course, beat the standard weight loss booklet, which probably has low adherence and doesn't get great results in the first place. We know that. Okay, so here's the interesting thing. It did work. It got better results. But then what happened was after the people stopped being followed up with, they went back to their regular routines, didn't end up holding on to the results at all a year and a half later. And that to me is just as important in this study as the results itself. Because we know, and I've shared this before, and I'll link up this podcast as well. I've actually done 2 shows on it before. It's called a 5-2 diet. Just a quick summary on that. 5 days of the week, you eat normally. 2 days of the week, you eat only anywhere between 400 and 800 calories per day, basically on your caloric intake. And so that's essentially what it's called. It's called a 5-2 diet. It's been around a really long time. It's just 2 days of the week, you don't eat as much. There's also another diet where 2 days of the week, you eat dinner the night before, and then you fast all day, and then you have dinner that night. And so basically get 2 24-hour fasts in a week, and that works really well too. And then there was the Ramadan diet that I shared with you too that gets phenomenal results. You basically ate early in the morning and then after sundown in the evening, and that got really good results. So time-restricted eating, intermittent fasting does absolutely work. I proved it, didn't prove it. I shared the research as well on episode 2791. I'll link that up as well. But time-restricted eating does work. The issue is that whatever you choose for a diet, you need to be able to maintain it. And that's why I'm so hard on a lot of these diets that are 0 carbohydrate or super low carb, is just because unless you have a really good plan, you're not going to be able to stick with that. So unless you know, like, okay, I'm going to do carbs on exercise days only. Okay, well, that's a plan, but are you going to do that forever, the rest of your life? And if you're not, okay, well, then what's the plan to do when you get tired of this diet or when you transition off of it? And if you're going to do a keto diet, okay, well, are you going to do that the rest of your life? And if you're not, just let me know, like, what's the plan then after that? What does it look like? Because you're going to start eating carbs again. Most people do. And then they actually rebound worse because their body's not able to even use those carbohydrates to the same degree. And so that's what I ask people, is that good to get results. You can get results in a lot of different ways, but which way is going to be sustainable for you? That's what I want to be able to help with. That's what I try to help, obviously, my private clients with. And of course, that's what I try to share here on the Cabral concept, that there's not necessarily one best way of doing it, but there are healthy ways, of course, some ways healthier than others, but it's what's sustainable. Because I can give you the research, I can show you what works best, but is it going to work best for you? So let me know what does work best for you in the comments. I would love to hear that. And if you're on maybe a more restricted plan, what's the goal? What's the plan to be able to transition off of that in the future? Thanks so much for tuning into the show. Again, all the show notes, the 3 big takeaways will be at stevencabral.com/2812. Take care, everybody. Did you know that the body really only becomes sick or unbalanced in only 2 ways? Over time, you become deficient in vital nutrients, and you also accumulate toxins internally and from the environment. As those nutrients diminish and you increase your total toxic load, your body then begins to show the first signs of dis-ease. It's actually quite predictable, and the good news is that if we know how you began to fill up that proverbial rain barrel, we also know how to empty it to begin the healing process. I was fortunate enough to learn this ancient healing process from my mentor after suffering from debilitating diseases for close to a decade. It was only when I began to implement these techniques did I finally overcome my illnesses and go on to live a life of energy and vitality that I now enjoy. I'd like to share with you now what I discovered after traveling all over the world and how to combine the best of ancient healing wisdom with state-of-the-art science. Allow me to teach you exactly how I've been able to help over 250,000 people to empty their rain barrel and begin to transform their body and lives into what they've always hoped they could be. To get your copy of the international bestseller, The Rain Barrel Effect, simply go to stephencabral.com/rainbarrel.